Good morning to friends of the Museum of South Texas History. My name is Francisco Guajardo, and welcome to this month's edition of Museum Pláticas. Today's focus will be on Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, as it is expressed by the museum, but also we want to provide a little bit of context, a little bit of historical, cultural context. And so we're going to have a couple of pláticas to try to do that, to sort of fill this contextual kind of understanding so that our audience, our community can engage us in this kind of understanding. And so we will begin with a conversation with a museum employee, René Ballesteros, who has been a real innovator in the Dia de los Muertos program at the museum. And so we will do that conversation, that plática with René, and then we're going to bring on two very special guests, community members who have been steadfast in their production of altares through the years. Stephanie, for example, the one of our guests, has been building altares at the museum for 10 years. And so Dalia, her mother, will join us in a plática to understand why it is that they do this. What are the sources of inspiration? What are the stories that they tell? And so I think we're going to have some fun and some real kind of an enlightened moment here today as we understand how people express themselves through this moment in the year, which is a national holiday in Mexico and has grown in cultural and social importance in the United States. So when we come back from this break, René Ballesteros will join me in a plática. Stay with us, please.
I'm Audrey Trevino Guerra with HEB Public Affairs. As we continue to celebrate diversity and inclusion at HEB, it is important to highlight our wonderful cultures in the Rio Grande Valley. We are celebrating Dia de los Muertos. Together, HEB and Most History are bringing this colorful and fun event to our communities this year. Each year, Most History invites the public to be part of the community altar exhibit by building altars for Dia de los Muertos, a Mexican tradition that is made in remembrance of a loved one. We invite you to be our guest for both opening and closing weekends of the community altar exhibit. HEB will cover the admission fees for anyone who visits Saturday, October 23rd through Sunday, October 24th, and on Saturday, November 6th through Sunday, November 7th.
On Saturday, October 30th, HEB will present the Dia de los Muertos Children's Activities area, where the decoration of sugar skulls takes center stage. Costume Calaveras, a brand new addition to the event, will add even more excitement. HEB has made it possible to acquire 4 reproduction historical costumes representing the time of the turn of the 20th century. The characters you will meet at Dia de los Muertos are inspired by Mexican cartoonist José Guadalupe Posada. Posada used his art to make commentary on the society and politics of his day through political satire, often using calaveras or skeletons. His most enduring character was La Calavera Garbancera, also widely known as La Catrina. Throughout the years to come, these costumes will be used for other educational events with different 20th century characters as part of the museum's Try On History program.
On behalf of HEB
and the Museum of South Texas History,
we hope you can join us for the community altar exhibit and Dia de los Muertos celebrations.
Celebrate Dia de los Muertos, Recuerdos y Ofrendas at the Museum of South Texas History in Edinburgh. Starting October 30th, you can enjoy festivities with a community altar exhibit and activities supported by HEB. Visit mosthistory.org/events for the latest details.
Okay, welcome back to Museum Pláticas, and so Francisco Guajardo once again, and I have a guest with me, a colega here at the Museum of South Texas History. So, René, would you introduce yourself? Tell the world who you are.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is René Ballesteros. I work as a community engagement officer here at the Museum of South Texas History. Started in 2009 and worked in a bunch of different positions, but been working with Dia de los Muertos for at least since 2014 and before that as well.
René, you and I were having a conversation earlier around the coffee machine, and so I think that we both agreed that Dia de los Muertos is something that we weren't necessarily raised with in the Valley. It's something that we come to when we come to, like you, for example, when you came to the museum. Speak about that story, about how you came to gain an awareness about this and an understanding about this.
Right. So this year we're celebrating the 19th annual Dia de los Muertos. And even early on when I worked at the museum, the question was kind of like, why are we observing this, especially since it's something more associated with the interior of Mexico, not so much the borderlands or the north part. And when I asked, leadership then, it was as an educational medium for people to learn more, and especially to talk about the Mexican-American diaspora, as we go in different places of the world. And over time, mostly what I've learned has been through listening to others, their experiences. And I think here at the museum, not that we're an authority to that extent, but we're a space where people can come in to express those cultural traditions.
So, René, you were raised in the McAllen area. You have roots in Monterrey, so you do have very clear Mexican roots. But being raised in the McAllen area, and then going to high school there, and then going to college. When you went to college, to study anthropology. Yeah. And so, in studying anthropology, what did you learn about something like Dia de los Muertos?
Right. I guess in like the world view, anthropology kind of helps in, especially looking at different societies around the world, that every society has usually some type of celebration around like an equinox, the fall equinox, the summer solstice. And this was one, Dia de los Muertos specifically, is one of many that coincided around this end of October, early November, fall kind of equinox.
So one of the things that you've learned is that this Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, as it's called in the United States, and even in Mexico, they call it, I think, Dia de Muertos, not Dia de los Muertos.
Or Días de Muertos.
So Dia de los Muertos is almost like the Mexican-American sort of, term.
Right.
Okay. Dia de los Muertos, as we understand it, this is like deeply rooted in indigenous traditions in Mexico, and as you suggested, in other parts of the world. But this particular brand of it that we know of today is Dia de los Muertos. Take us through, and I appreciate you say, look, I'm not an authority here, the museum is not an authority, but we know a little bit because we pay attention, we do programming, and so we read up on it, we talk to people, we listen, and we learn. So as best as you can construct this story of, say, the rich, deep history, we're not talking about here 500 years ago. We're talking about like 1,000 or a couple thousand years ago with, say, the Aztecs and the Toltecs and the Mayans and Mesoamerican expression. Speak to that a little bit, just to situate ourselves, in the history of.
Right. Definitely before European contact, the process of colonization, there is evidence and some documents, there's a lot lost, but there's evidence of celebrations around this time. And a lot of those elements have transferred their way into today's expression, including some of the native plants, which are in the ofrendas, native as in native to the American continents, as well as...
Such as the marigold?
Like the cempasúchil, which the marigold, which from what I've read, a long time ago, they would just grow like weeds. Now they're cultivated and they're grown very large, but they were accessible and they were something that everybody could use to make their, and I mean, I guess there's some evidence of altars before, not like what we think of today, like the that is in-house and with the different levels, but more altars as a place of offerings for those who have passed. And then something that we all associate, or many times associated with Dia de los Muertos, is the butterfly, the monarch migration. And that's, exclusive and unique to the Americas, that whole migration. And that is rooted in the belief that those are the souls of the loved ones returning to visit the living.
And the monarchs come in late October, early November. So it's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see them because if you think about their path, they cross through our area, they go north into even Canada as well, and they go down there when the seasons change.
So we're going to get to this in a little bit, but when you come to the museum, hopefully to be part of the celebration of Dia de los Muertos with us, go out to behind the jail is where we have this, what we call the Looney Legacy Park. And so there is an area there with plant life that has become really a butterfly place.
Yeah, we specifically plant milkweed, which is a host of the larvae that are used for monarchs and the queens and the king butterflies. And then we also have Padre Blue Mist, which is like it's known as South Padres, or like Berlandier's Blue Mist, has like a little blue puff on top, and they attract them all the time. So around this time of year, you'll see monarchs and all types of species coming through as a stopping point on their migration south.
So from an sort of an ecological standpoint, there's such alignment here, even with the creatures that sort of move in very organic, natural ways. So that's a beautiful thing. So René, so there's a story here, that's because Dia de los Muertos is distinctly pre-Hispanic. And so there's evidence, as you suggest, right? I mean, there's evidence in some of the archaeology of skulls, for example, in some of the Aztec remains. And then we know that when the Spanish come, when Cortés comes and the Spanish come, and then there's this colonization process, that the new Catholic traditions and the Christian traditions attempt to reconcile what they want to do with the traditions of the indigenous people. And then we get something there. So speak to that kind of like the meshing of the two that give birth to a new kind of cultural social expression. Right.
And beyond just the two. I mean, I think when we think of the colonization process, we think of Aztecs and, Hernán Cortés. There were many societies across Mexico and the Americas, and something that I don't know, that I've always been curious about, is how that was expressed uniquely in different geographic areas. But most of what we think of as far as that syncretism that happened between Catholic beliefs and the indigenous beliefs, and the expression that we see today, is mostly rooted in like that interior de Mexico, Oaxaca, certain states right there in the south, and those pre-Hispanic traditions. But I guess for me, it's always a curious thing. I'm wondering how that was expressed throughout different parts of Mexico and in the world as well. So when those two cultures and traditions meshed together, it wasn't just in Mexico, it was, further down Guatemala, and then across Europe as well. So there's some evidence and even traditions today, like in Europe, of Samhain, where around November 1st, they keep a hearth on all night, and they put out food offerings. A lot of traditions around Mass, around offerings as well, and even altares, and beyond just, the Americas.
So good point, right? On and beyond that, because we have a multitude of cultural experiences that sort of come together in a place like Mexico, in a place like the Americas, including the African tradition that becomes part of the emerging culture. So it's fascinating stuff. And then at some point, it comes over here, because things are coming over here all the time. But there's something that happens, René, that's very distinctly Mexican. And so you and I were having this conversation earlier about how certain icons become like leading icons in the expression of not only in the Mexican tradition. And so you spoke of Jose Guadalupe Posada, right? Who was a cartoonist in Mexico in the 19th century, and probably about 20, 30 years younger than Porfirio Diaz. But then when he was coming up, he took shots at Porfirio Diaz in Mexico and took shots at other politicos through his cartooning.
Right.
And through his cartooning, so there's an image of the great Mexican artist Jose Guadalupe Posada, who takes shots through his satire, right? And he does that by creating these kinds of images. And so, like the Catrina, for example, speak to that because he's creating this kind of stuff, right? And he's taking it from ancient traditions.
Right. So from what I've learned about Posada is he had a print shop, a lithographer specifically, printed all types of things in su taller, including newspapers, advertisements, and most famously were called broadsides, which are like one-page advertisements, sometimes big, good amount of size. And in those, especially during the Mexican Revolution, Posada passed away in 1913, so he was passed away towards the beginning of that. Leading up to that, there were a lot of, like as you said, satirical, kind of putting the revolution in the context of ancient, or not necessarily ancient, but still living iconography in the interior de Mexico. When he passed away in 1913, he wasn't necessarily recognized. Like, he wasn't recognized for this work. They were popular amongst people, especially if, let's say you were illiterate or you didn't know how to read. You could look at those photographs and
read
get some
that
kind of meaning off of that,
right?
Or get the joke off of that. But it wasn't until later that he's kind of rediscovered by the muralist movement. And his most iconic etching is that of La Calavera or La Catrina Garbancera, and this is like the kind of the picture that we see the most. And when you go to events, you see the Catrina with their hat. I guess the satire here is, even though this Mexican lady of high stature is dressing in French fashions, like in death, she's still a calavera in that way. And along with this picture, in the original broadsides, the prints, is a whole poem, like maybe 20 stanzas long, outlining her influence and relationship with a good joke of death in a way.
Right. I mean, so during this time, this is when, say, not only is Posada very, very, I think, prominent, but there's like a whole class, a whole generation of Mexicanos who are coming after, say, Diaz and the Mexican intellectual elite for wanting to be Euro. And so La Catrina, I think you mentioned, right, is like dressed in European garb, but kind of as a dig.
And in that revolution, in that time, there were many Mexicos. There was definitely armies in the north of a different mind of like what should be the future of Mexico. After the revolution, to try and have some kind of national identity, a lot of the muralist movement moved towards kind of like a pan-Mexican, identity that everybody could kind of get behind, the mestizaje, that kind of deal. And they use that iconography as a familiar view to unite people through muralism.
So when you say that by 1913, when Posada is like almost obscure himself, right? His work wasn't necessarily. But his work, you say, is then picked up by the muralists. And so this is in the post-revolutionary period. So speak specifically to how it would have been picked up, by whom and how.
Yeah, I mean, the most famous, I think we have an image of this, is a mural, Paseo por la Alameda, and it has a lot longer title, but as you see here, this is Diego Rivera's mural. In English, it's Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in Alameda Park, which is a famous park in Mexico City. This is like the promenade where you would walk and see others, and centered in this is La Catrina Garbancera, but centered in it, alongside
in the middle.
Yeah.
She's in the middle.
Yeah, Frida is over her shoulder, and you see La Malinche looking at her as well. That's the woman in yellow. And along with Porfirio should be around there.
That's Porfirio Diaz in the military. So it's in yellow is La Malinche. Porfirio Diaz is behind in the military garb, and then the man with the cane in the middle is Posada himself. And Posada is right next to La Catrina, and then Diego Rivera is the diminutive one. Diego Rivera was a very large man, and so this is Diego Rivera as a child, right, with Frida right behind. And so all of these are luminaries in Mexican history. Wow. And La Catrina is right in the middle of it. So René, talk about this. Talk about the centrality of La Catrina, because this is about 47, more or less? Diego Rivera. So this this takes off. I mean, 2021, we're talking about like Athena because of that.
Yeah, and I guess as we're getting to like kind of how does it come to the United States, in the 50s, 60s, Mexican-American civil rights movements, the Chicano movements, they go back to Mexico and kind of in rediscovering their own history, find this muralism and seeing the advantage of, you can read that without having to read it. That's where muralism really kind of starts blowing up in the United States as a tradition. And we see that today in today's, beyond just think of California, sometimes it's Chicanos, but, in Texas, right here in South Texas, there's even a muralist movement today in, what's represented out there.
Yeah, in fact, at the museum. I mean, we have scheduled at some point here in the near future the creation of a museum on the East Wall. So even we are sort of, in the middle of that. So all of this then comes to a head here in the expression of Dia de los Muertos in the United States. And a la the Museum of South Texas History, you mentioned, the years that this museum has been doing this. You lead the effort these days in putting this together. Speak to what 2021 looks like.
Yep.
Dia de los Muertos at the museum.
I mean, very much so. As a project manager of the event, it's not necessarily me that does all. It's a lot of, like, I can't say without a doubt, it's like the community who helps put this together. And as I mentioned, what I've learned over time has been so much from the vendors, the altar builders, performers, like their own expression and connection to this event. And not only that, I mean, the families that come in, the artisans, it really is. And of course the museum staff as well, volunteers. It's a community effort that really has grown over years. And there's a number of things that we do. The main event itself is Saturday, October 30th from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. Thanks to our friends at HEB, we do have some free crafts, or, upon admission, our regular admission prices do apply. And when you get inside, you're going to have free crafts like sugar skulls. You can make it and take it home. Paper flower crafts, emulating the cempasúchiles that are used traditionally. And we are going to have our interpreters as calaveras and costumen. So they're going to be in historic garb with their face painted, interpreting some of Guadalupe Posada's poems, the calaveritas literarias that went along with those photos. Another activity we have is we're going to have some poets, some Borderland poets here leading calaveritas literarias, so helping people write their own. And there's going to be a place for you to post your stuff. And, we spoke about the monarch tree as well. Of course, one of the central things of our event is the community altar exhibit. Within that, we did this a few years ago, we're bringing it back. We have this 30-foot tree that we cover with paper monarchs. And the idea is when guests come in, they write a message to their loved one. And then by the time the event's over, we have this this beautiful community construction. So everybody has an opportunity to take part in this event.
Wow, that's terrific. So, René, as we segue into the next segment, set it up for us. Set up Stephanie and Stephanie's mother, Dalia, and how it is that they come to this museum.
Yeah. So I've been here since 2009, and I think Stephanie and Dalia have been making altars since before that. So they've been here, one of our steadfast altar builders. Every year it's grown over time, but now we have it in our main courtyard gallery area where we have 11 altars as well as the tree and a mystery altar. And it really is the central part of the expression of Dia de los Muertos. It's up for 2 weeks, so beyond just the event itself, it's a special exhibit. And it's something that it really shows. It's a medium and a place for people to not only honor their loved ones, but to share their stories. Because what we've done now is, we ask every altar builder for a biography of who they're honoring, and that goes into our archives to be preserved forever. So it's to kind of put in a museum viewpoint or perspective. It's a way to get stories and information.
Wow. So if there's one thought that you could impart to people who have not been a part of this, what would that thing be? Like, come to the museum to see the altares, to take part in Dia de los Muertos because?
Well, museum support at first as well, but also it's just probably, I guess, in my mind, maybe the coolest expression of a museum event. It really is. The entire staff puts their effort into this, and it goes way beyond any single person or even the museum itself. Come to Dia de los Muertos because you get to be part of this bigger event and the longer story over time.
It's terrific. Thank you, René. Appreciate your work. When we come back, we will have a plática with Stephanie and Dalia. Thank you.
I'm Audrey Trevino Guerra with HEB Public Affairs. As we continue to celebrate diversity and inclusion at HEB, it is important to highlight our wonderful cultures in the Rio Grande Valley. We are celebrating Dia de los Muertos. Together, HEB and Most History are bringing this colorful and fun event to our communities this year. Each year, Most History invites the public to be part of the community altar exhibit by building altars for Dia de los Muertos, a Mexican tradition that is made in remembrance of a loved one. We invite you to be our guest for both opening and closing weekends of the community altar exhibit. HEB will cover the admission fees for anyone who visits Saturday, October 23rd through Sunday, October 24th, and on Saturday, November 6th through Sunday, November 7th.
On Saturday, October 30th, HEB will present the Dia de los Muertos Children's Activities area, where the decoration of sugar skulls takes center stage. Costume Calaveras, a brand new addition to the event, will add even more excitement. HEB has made it possible to acquire 4 reproduction historical costumes representing the time of the turn of the 20th century. The characters you will meet at Dia de los Muertos are inspired by Mexican cartoonist José Guadalupe Posada. Posada used his art to make commentary on the society and politics of his day through political satire, often using calaveras or skeletons. His most enduring character was La Calavera Garbancera, also widely known as La Catrina. Throughout the years to come, these costumes will be used for other educational events with different 20th century characters as part of the museum's Try On History program.
On behalf of HEB
and the Museum of South Texas History,
we hope you can join us for the Community Altar exhibit and Dia de los Muertos celebrations.
Celebrate Dia de los Muertos, recuerdos y ofrendas at the Museum of South Texas History in Edinburgh. Starting October 30th, you can enjoy festivities with the community altar exhibit and activities supported by HEB. Visit mosthistory.org/events for the latest details.
Welcome back to Friends of the Museum of South Texas History. So I have the pleasure now of being in a space with these two altar builders. And so Stephanie Salinas and Dalia Hernandez Salinas, you've been, and René talked about you and how even before I think he got here. Is this true that you all were doing altares maybe before he got here?
Well, like, we didn't do the first one here until
2010. When your grandpa died.
but it was 2011 maybe?
Yeah.
Was
yeah,
the first one
it's
here?
2011. Was the
But
first
you
one
were
here.
you were doing them somewhere else.
Well, just at home. I did.
Okay.
I built one at home.
Okay.
I don't know if it was the year before or the year before that.
So let's start this by talking about who you are.
Okay.
So, Dalia, introduce yourself. Where are you from? What do you do, or what did you do maybe before you retired? Because I think I understood the other day that you had retired.
Yes, I'm Dalia Salinas, Hernandez Salinas. I was born in Mercedes, and got married to my husband, David. He's from Edcouch, and we lived in Edcouch for like 5 years, a little bit, about 5 years, and then we moved back to Mercedes, which is where we live now, and we raised our children. I have 3 children. They're all adults now, Stephanie, Selena, and Sean. But they all still live at home. I worked for 25 years with the state of Texas as Health and Human Services, and I was a supervisor for like 18 years. I retired 5 years ago. And right now, mostly I do a lot of running around. I took care of my mom for 3 years, running around with her to her appointments. She kept progressively getting worse. So every day I had something to do with my mom, and I would take her to her appointments, pick her up, and stay with her until my sister got home. Majority of my time, those 3 years, was with my mother. My kids, my husband would go and stay there with me. We spend a lot of time with her. She passed away 2.5 years ago. My dad had passed away before that, like 8 years prior to that. So now I still do a lot of running around. I'm a vendor at a antique shop. I have a little booth there, and that's mainly my job, but not really. It's a hobby. I love it.
So when you come to the museum, you come to the museum to build an altar.
Yes.
And you mentioned already 2 people. You mentioned your mother, who passed away 2.5 years ago. You also mentioned your father,
My father,
who passed away
Chen.
10 years ago. And so who do you memorialize in the altar that you make, or that you're making today?
Today it's my dad,
Your father,
my mother,
your mother,
and my brother that we lost last year.
and your brother. Okay. So Stephanie, what's your story with this? But you're from Mercedes?
I'm from Mercedes.
Yes, and so you went to Mercedes High School,
I
I'm
went to
guessing?
Mercedes High School.
Yes, okay.
I went to Pan American, UTPA before it was UTRGV.
What did you study at UTPA?
I studied TV film, and then I went back and got my master's in theater. And during that time, that's when I started doing all of this for the Day of the Dead, like altar building. But I love Mercedes. I love my town. I love the valley, and I like a lot of the stuff my mom likes. So I like antiquing and stuff like that too.
What was for you, Stephanie, the early inspiration in altar building?
I just liked doing it. I like the idea of, again, it wasn't something that we necessarily were doing. I like the idea of kind of taking from our culture, from Mexico. Again, this is something we really did here, and kind of building on that and using it to remember people that we lost before. So like when I was younger, like my other grandmother and my aunt had passed away, and so I mean, it's different when you're little. You don't really get to like do anything about it, or like maybe talk about it. I mean, you remember them, but it was a way to kind of like pay, like, or honor them and respect them. I mean, other than like my family, we're really big on making sure we go to the cemetery and we leave flowers for them. But this was a different thing because it's a little bit more, again, it's in your home, and here it's in display for people to see it. So I feel like it's a little bit more, you're kind of showing more people, I guess, something that you love these people that are not here anymore.
Was it you who came to the museum and wanted to do this, or did somebody call you, or was it you, Dalia, who took the initiative on this? How did this happen? Your connection with the museum and Altar Building?
Well, I remember, I think I had told you that a long time ago I had come here with the Girl Scouts when I was a kid. But I know we came when I was a kid with my whole family. We came to the event that we had here. And again, I don't know, I guess it's just something that I really liked and we remembered about it. And around that time, I remember my grandfather passing away, because he passed away in August of 2010. And I would have liked to have done it, but it was also fast and so early. And I remember seeing it on Channel 5, the community calendar, and it's the museum asking if anyone wants to do that, but it was too early. So I'm like, well, next year I'm going to pay attention for that, and I'm going to reach out and see what they tell me. And then the next year when it came around and it shows up on there, that's when I reached out to, I don't remember if I emailed somebody, if I called. At that time, I remember her last name, but Melissa was in charge, and that's how it all started here.
And at the time, were you in high school? Were you an undergrad?
That was, what was I?
10, 11?
It was still undergrad.
Okay.
Yeah, I was still an undergrad.
And so you were coming to Edinburgh
Yeah,
almost daily.
yeah.
And so for you, that would have been something like, I'm going to Edinburgh anyway, so maybe I can go do something there.
Mm.
And you were still working.
Yes, but I think we were talking about this yesterday. It was like we took it really hard when my dad died. It was something that we wanted to do. My mom was very involved with it. I mean, she would help us with everything, help us find stuff, help us open flowers, because we make our own flowers. She really got involved with it. So it was a little bit of my mom too, and her wanting also to honor my dad and respect him. I remember the first time we came, she would come to the festival, and she'd be here most of the time. Sometimes she'd get here before we did, and they'd be interviewing her. She would stand there and say, "See," and for my dad, I think several people interviewed her, like the students that come here, but it became a family thing. Some of my sisters also. One of my sisters would help us open flowers also, but I think a lot of it had to do with honoring my dad. That's the first thing she said, "I'm gonna do it for Grandpa."
Now, when you said that sometimes your mother would get here first, you talk about your mother who was born like in 1930 or something.
Yeah, 1932. She's yeah.
So how was your mother getting here before
She
you?
made my sister bring her.
Okay, so she knew how to leverage resources.
Yes, and she would go like, her provider would come and she goes, "Josie, viera de this," and she would go brag like, "Está bien bonito, Josie. Y tienen esto." She really enjoyed it. I mean, like, she would buy things. That's my mom. Stephanie's her first granddaughter. She has grandsons, but Stephanie's her first granddaughter, and so. Miss Stephanie's doing this, and Stephanie's real creative, and Stephanie's, she was really into it.
What was your mother's name?
Regina.
Regina, you had told us that
Yes,
before because
yes.
we did a story on your
Yeah.
brother.
Uh-huh.
And so Regina was a real museum person.
Oh, yeah. About Dia de los Muertos. She might not come the rest of the year, but Dia de los Muertos, she was going to come. Unfortunately, her last year, the last year she didn't get to come. Maybe the last 2 years she didn't.
Yeah,
she wasn't feeling that well. But other than that, she was here.
Yeah, because your mother died in the last couple of years,
Yeah,
you said.
yeah.
So right before the pandemic, she would have died. Yeah.
Mhm.
Wow. And okay, so your mother was all into it.
Yes.
And your mother must have been a driving force in this. I mean, your grandma, maybe you were the one who kind of like understood how to communicate with the museum and how to say, yes, I want a space. But then your grandma was all in.
Yeah.
Tell us a story about that, about how your grandmother, like, drove the energy of this.
She would just like, again, she liked coming and she liked doing all of the, just coming and seeing everything. And again, she would do her little altar at home,
She
and
still has it there. It's still there.
and she
The-
would like,
What's
Her altar that she left. It's
the
still
altar
at her
that your
house.
mother made to honor her
Yeah,
husband?
she had it on all the time. She would put her mother, my grandmother, my grandfather. She had pictures. And my sister was just telling me, because I have a sister that stayed living there, and she goes, you can have all the mom's altar stuff if you want it. Because she knows we do this. She goes, because it's still there. We don't go as often to my mom's house because of COVID. We just go real quick in and out if I go drop off something. But it's in a little table in the living room. She still has her
How
stuff
about
there.
that?
Yeah.
Wow. That's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
when I was younger, I remember she would build an altar. And around this time, for Dia de los Muertos,
So-
she would do one.
When you were younger, Dalia, this is before any of the rage around Dia de los Muertos. You're saying that your mother built altares.
Yeah.
Because you know what? Now that you say that, I remember my mother did some of that.
Yeah.
My mother was born in 1934. My mother would do like small things.
Yes, it was a little one. And we go trick-or-treating, and nos quitaba dulces, put some of her candies there. But she would buy like fruit and food and put it there. And it wasn't on all the time back then. But she would do it for a while. And
Because
then-
the idea is that those that you
Uh-huh.
are, honoring, they eat.
Mhm.
And they're going to eat el pan,
Yeah,
el dulce
Yeah.
que deja uno ahí.
yeah,
How about that?
yes.
So you were saying about your and then I think that your mother said the story that it's still there. But continue your thought.
I don't know. I just liked, I remember like just going, and it wasn't necessarily that, like she would always like have little candles like burning somewhere, like setting them up in a certain way. And she like, again, we're all like my family, we're really big pack rats. So like a bunch of the stuff that I have for this is stuff that I've kept from the beginning. And I'm always buying things for it. My grandma is like that. And that's why her altar still has a bunch of stuff from over the years, and even getting things from here, like some vendors that sell like little candies or like the little coffins that are made out of sugar. Like my grandma would buy that and she'd keep it because I'm the same way. But I'd even like when I started making sugar skulls, like I would give her a sugar skull to put on her altar, and she would keep all of that. But I liked always doing something because I know, okay, my grandma's not like that, or I think, oh, my grandma likes this. So
But what do you think? And maybe your grandmother told you this, but so here's your grandma. Before you were born, she was building these little altares, and then she has a granddaughter who goes big with it. How would she reflect on that? That you were building on something that she had done 30 years before, maybe 40 years before. Did you have those kind of conversations?
I mean, not really, but I think she liked that we're taking the time, like that we did that on our own, or I did that on my own. I don't know.
So to say that I did that on my own has one meaning. To say I did that because I learned it through the stories of my mother and my grandmother. Because you must have.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Because again, like it's not like somebody pushed me to do it. I started wanting to do it on my own.
You wanted to.
Yeah, and
Based on this kind of ancestral knowledge that you had in you.
yeah, I guess. I don't know. I just
What did you think when René and I were having our conversation here? You know, because this is like stuff like from literature and history and, and art history. When you talk about Posada and Diego Rivera and murals and Katrina and the, the indigenous people and all of this. How do you make sense of all of that?
My grandmother and my grandfather on my mom's side are from San Miguel de Allende. And they came to the United States when they had barely got married. I think my grandmother was like 14, 15 years old. My grandfather was several years older, but they all came down here and they never went back. So that's where my mom got it from, my grandmother, because my grandmother would do that. But I remember when I was young, must have been like 8 years old, We had an uncle that came from over there. He crossed illegally to come work, him and his son. And he went and found us because we used to go to West Texas and Muleshoe. We used to go there. My parents would go work, and we'd be there. And he went and found us. And my grandmother at that time, they were also there in that area. And he would tell us about all the feasts they had over there. And I remember he wrote to them because he made us go over there because we had never been to San Miguel. And my dad said, yeah, we'll go. So when we went, he had told them to save us some little sugar stuff. Because it's not just skulls. We had like little baskets and little monitos. So we got some of those when I was little, I remember. And that's why I said, like, wow, I didn't realize they did that. It was real pretty, though.
He was an uncle?
Mi tío. Era hermano it was actually my mom's cousin. He was my grandmother's sister or brother was his dad.
So he brought that.
Yeah.
And so, but you were able to connect with that because you had already seen like bits and pieces from your mother.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah.
So this is part of the beauty of this sort of like cultural migration and with experiences of people, they come from San Miguel de Allende and they bring something with them.
Yeah.
And then that thing that they bring becomes part of the expression of a community. And so what we're doing here is really honoring the dead for sure, but we're also honoring those experiences of people that come from one part of the world to another part of the world, and they bring their traditions with them. So that's kind of a cool thing.
And, like I told you, Stephanie, this is her idea. I just help her. I'm not the altar builder. She is. All the stuff that she has, sometimes I say, hey, Stephanie might like this. But sometimes she tells me no. She's very picky about what she has. So all the things that my husband sometimes goes, why does she have so much? But that she already knows. She's real meticulous about what she wants there. She takes pride in what she does. So I'm very proud of her.
Can you talk to that? Can you speak to how you envision it, how you think about the pieces that go into here and there? Because you are essentially a designer of altares, right? And you have an idea of how you want it.
Yeah, I have it in my head more or less every year. Like,
do you sketch
kind
it?
of. Sometimes I do, like more or less what I'm gonna do. I have like a box that I have there that I had it in my head of what I wanted for the year that I did it for my grandma, my other grandma, the one's my dad's mom, and I basically asked him to build the box for me. And so I've had that box and I've used it for several other ones. So a lot of things, they might come, it's something that I want for it and I end up keeping it and I reuse it over and over again. So like this year there's like, I'm really big on getting things that I find from like estate sales or like yard sales. Like I like objects that belong to people and maybe like, again, they're gone now, but they belong to somebody and I feel like they're important. I feel like I can put them on my altar, and I feel like, to me, at least over time, that's kind of where it's gone, where it's like the energy from objects that people have kind of stay with the altar. Like it's become like a living thing, if that makes sense, over time, because they're from everywhere. It's not like this is just my grandma's stuff or this is just my uncle's stuff. Like this is stuff from everywhere. But I feel like that's something that I do. Because there's a lot of stuff that belongs to other people, again, and I like that about it.
Well, they belong to her now, but
no, they're mine now. But that's for like, because I really don't like it when people get rid of stuff. That's why I'm telling you, I'm like a really big pack rat. Because like I don't, again, like somebody like really cared for this object and they had it in their home, and then like when they die, like, you can't keep everything that somebody has, but I might be able to keep it and I can give it a home. Does that make sense? I do that a lot.
So, we talked earlier, René and I, about this one illustrator in Mexican history named Posada. Posada worked for a man named Irineo Paz. Irineo Paz's grandson would become the great writer named Octavio Paz. And so he was like a Nobel Prize winner in literature. Octavio Paz wrote about you. He wrote about people who love this kind of work. He said that the Mexicano, he said, loves to dance with death, to fight with death. And death becomes the most steadfast love of the Mexicano. That sounds like you. It sounds like you're dancing with, con los muertos and like emotionally, yes, but you're also quite inspired by this.
I think I am. Because even the other one I told you before, like I have that group that I'm in, the Chulita Vinyl Club, and it all started from like getting records that were used, and I never understood how would somebody get rid of their records. Like I don't like I would never get rid of my records if like intentionally or on purpose, because I like again like when I'm like CDs, that's what I was listening to, and I never get rid of my CDs until they were like broken or like completely scratched. But the same thing, like I wouldn't get rid of my records, and it's kind of like that, where I can't believe somebody would want to get rid of this thing that's something that I really cared about or they really cared about, and now they're mine. They're like the little orphans. I say my orphan records are mine now.
Stephanie, thank you for being such a leader in this work, and Dalia, thank you for supporting your daughter as you do. Is there anything else you want to say?
No, I mean, I think that again, like this event is really important, and I feel like a lot of people have begun embracing it, and I always encourage everybody, especially if they've lost somebody, you can totally make one. Like if you don't want to do it like this, you can do it at home, and I feel like that's very helpful. Like my friend Evie, she's doing one this year for her grandmother who passed away last year, and it's very, I feel like again it helps. It's not going to get rid of how you feel. You're still going to be sad, but it helps a lot.
She can dance with her grandmother.
Yeah.
Interact. Keep her alive. Mm-hmm. It is those that we don't remember who die.
Yeah. And last year, y'all didn't have so she did one outside, and y'all featured it, I think, in one of this Pláticas.
We did. We interviewed the two of you.
Yes. And that one was very special too. It was like we had people that would pass by just to see it. Our neighbor she goes, I didn't want to go to your property, and I mean our yard's not that great, but we had it in the front yard, and people like my sisters went, they got up, their kids, and they went to see it. My nephew, which is my brother's son, was there a long time. They were there for hours with us outside because we wouldn't go inside anyway. But he was very appreciative and really appreciated it. And Stephanie took the time to do that, and him and Stephanie are very close. They grew up together. They're the same age, went to school together. So that was a very special.
And so his father, your brother, you're featuring in this altar. And so, I wasn't going to bring this up, but I will bring it out since he came up. And so this is an image of Lupe, because Lupe, your brother, Stephanie's uncle.
That's part of the altar.
This is part of the altar. And so we wrote a story on Lupe when Lupe died due to COVID-19 complications. And so it's how I got to know you. Of course, you already knew the museum through your altar building. But yeah, I mean, it was part of our Bearing Witness initiative. And, when I don't remember how we found out about your uncle. Maybe René alerted us to it. Do you remember how we found out? I guess it doesn't matter.
I think we were just talking on the thing, and it just kind of got. It just so happened to be.
Because we were preparing for the program, Dia de los Muertos program, and then you mentioned it, and I thought that might be a story to pursue. And then the two of you were very willing to talk.
And his daughter-in-law, she adored him.
I remember talking to her. She was
so
great.
Much, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We referenced
Christina,
her in the article,
yes.
Christina.
Yeah, Christina loved him so much.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I always enjoy speaking with the two of you. You bring such authenticity, to life, and so we want to thank you for that. And the museum thanks you for it as well. And so we're going to sign off here.
Yeah. Thank you for allowing us to honor our relatives and people we know.
Well, we're very happy and proud to do that, and you're welcome for that. So, Tony, I'm going to check with you. Do we have another segment, or is this the end? This is the end. Okay, so to our friends of the Museum of South Texas History, we thank you for being part of the October 2021 installment. We will see you in November for another Museum Plática. So take care and be safe.